and relay satellites. As we orbit the Earth 17,500 miles per hour, they will come off and on, as you have just seen right here, and we'll get views of Cygnus along the way. Telemetry data is showing that the Cygnus is approaching at a rate of just about, or just over, 0.1 meters per second, hanging out at around 275 meters from station. Cygnus is approaching what's called the 250-meter hold point. This is one of the hold points just outside of the Keep-Out Sphere, and one of the milestones designed into Cygnus approach. Now, Chad, why are we stopping at 250 meters?
Typically during this, we go ahead and check our systems prior to heading on into the second hold point at the 30 meter. One of the particular things we do here, besides verify all the systems are operating nominally, is we also do a propulsion system repress of the tanks to put things back in the proper nominal pressures, so that allows us, if we have to do any additional maneuvers, we're within the range. Sometimes it's required, sometimes it isn't, but since we have the ability to do it, and if we need that, then this is the prime opportunity that we take advantage of the 250-meter hold point.
So they'll undergo a series of checks, and then right when all of these checks are done, as you were saying, they'll depart it and cross the Keep-Out Sphere, about 200 meters or so, an arbitrary line designed around International Space Station. Once they cross this 200-meter point, there's actually communication from Serena Aunen-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst from on board the International Space Station. They're inside the cupola, or will be very soon, inside the cupola module at the controls of the space station's robotic arm to actually capture Cygnus today. But once they cross the Keep-Out Sphere, they do have the ability to issue an abort command if they do see anything go awry from the cupola windows. 7 bay windows have a great view of Cygnus as it's approaching. Now again, we're working towards that 250-meter hold point, now about 264 meters from station, still approaching slowly but surely, and the range rate is decreasing. Again, here we are in the Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas, the International Space Station Flight Control Room. We're working together with the Flight Control Center over in Dulles, Virginia. Northrop Grumman team standing by, actually flying Cygnus today. Zach Dwyer is the mission director over there, leading the teams that are undergoing some of the checks, as Chad was describing, to get us to capture at 4:20 a.m. Central Time, to bring 7,400 pounds of cargo that are inside Cygnus on board the International Space Station. Here in the International Space Station Flight Control Center, Anthony Varya is the flight director today. He'll be leading the teams and working hand-in-hand with some of the teams in Dulles, Virginia. Next to him is Tamara York. She will be the Capcom, and you'll hear her voice as she speaks with Serena Aunen-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst aboard the International Space Station, filtering all the information from this control room to the 2 astronauts aboard. Tom Castleberry will be the visiting vehicle officer today. He is communicating directly with the flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia, and making sure that the vehicle is safe and ready to dock to the International Space Station. Now again, the first milestone, one of many, will be the arrival of the 250-meter hold point. We're slowing down now as we approach at 257 meters away from the International Space Station. Space Station and Cygnus currently flying 256 statute miles over the Earth, just west off the coast of Australia. Getting some good views now as we're in an orbital daytime. You'll see that Terminator line right through the middle of Australia. Not too much longer after the arrival of the 250-meter hold point, we'll enter into an orbital nighttime. Views of Cygnus will just get a little bit darker, but we'll see some of the lights illuminated from the vehicle. Here's a view of what's called the Cuckoo workstation. It's a workstation on board the International Space Station. One of the cameras actually pointing towards that workstation. This is the telemetry data that's actually being fed to the International Space Station now. Serena Auñón-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst viewing it and monitoring the approach before they go into the cupola and work the controls of the station's robotic arm for capture later this morning. Again, a great view from the station's external cameras of Cygnus as it starts to its approach to the 250-meter hold point. The range rate we're getting data now is decreasing slowly as expected to arrive at the 250-meter hold point. Again, once we get to that, it's called the hold point for a reason. At 250 meters, we'll maintain that altitude from station and do a series of checks before departing again.
Station Houston, confirm Cygnus 250-meter hold per step 2 in 1.102.
That can work.
So as you just heard, that was Tamara York, the Capcom here in the International Space Station Mission Control Center here in Houston, Texas, calling up to Serena Auñón-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst, confirming that Cygnus is now holding steady at 250 meters. So Chad, now that we're at the 250-meter hold point, what is happening now as we are waiting to depart?
All right, the teams in Dulles, as you heard on the radio, they got the go to go ahead and perform the repress of our propulsion subsystem. So the prop engineers are monitoring those activities, open up the valves to put pressure into the different tanks to get things back in our nominal range for forward or to increase the performance for the follow-on activities we need to do as we leave the 250 hold point. Continue on.
And Alex, we are hands off. Cameras are yours.
Copy.
Great views of Cygnus as it's holding at 250 meters now. A bit cloudy below, but we are actually about 252 statute miles, or at least the International Space Station is. And right below is the islands of Indonesia. You may be able to see some peeking out through the clouds there. But very soon you'll see the view of Cygnus get slowly darker. We're crossing into the terminator line into an orbital darkness.
Station on 2 for Block Bravo.
Some of the external high-definition cameras providing great views of Cygnus as it's holding at 250 meters. You can really see the outline of the vehicle in the back there, the ultraflex solar arrays gathering power, providing that power to Cygnus to perform some of these operations. In the back there, looks like a whole jumble of all kinds of different hardware and equipment. Chad, what's going on in the back of the vehicle there?
Well, when you look at the service module on Cygnus, that's really the brains of the vehicle. That's where all the flight computers reside, the propulsion system, the electrical system, pretty much everything that makes Cygnus fly and do all the things it does. You can see real good in this picture on the very aft of the vehicle. That's the PBGF, the power video grapple fixture that the SSRMS will actually reach out and grab the vehicle with here shortly. And you can also see as you come up to the, from your view there, the left side looks like a white box on the side. That's where we keep our nanoracks and nanosats that we'll be deploying at the end of the mission, or once we depart ISS in a few months. So all kinds of different external as well as internal components mounted in the service module.
So not only the brains, but also a very functional part of what Cygnus is meant to do, deliver cargo, but not just to the International Space Station. There's the satellites are going to be deployed, you said, after it even departs space station. So we're talking about a different orbital incline, a little bit of a different altitude that we're deploying these, right?
Correct. Yeah, typically our customers for the nanosats prefer that we deploy those at our higher altitude, giving them the opportunity to have a longer life in orbit. But some of them will be deployed below as well, and it just depends on what the customer's preference is and what we're able to do. Obviously, our prime customer is NASA to get the cargo delivered, and obviously the fuel loads and everything are driven by that.
Well, we're looking forward to a successful completion of the arrival. Again, that is scheduled for 4:20 a.m. Central Time. Liftoff of Cygnus was just over 2 days ago. Here's a replay of that launch that happened just over 48 hours ago, 3:01 Central Time a.m. on Saturday. Lifted off from Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia, carrying 7,400 pounds of cargo aboard. Nighttime launch, a bit chilly, about 38 degrees Fahrenheit, the time of liftoff. But it made a perfectly scheduled and on-time ascent into orbit. Took about 9 minutes of the two stages, the first liquid stage and then the second solid rocket motor stage to get into orbit. Once in orbit, just about 2 hours later, solar arrays deployed, received some power, and it is on its way to the International Space Station. Now you can see the view of Cygnus, as mentioned before, getting a little bit darker. So again, this is a view of the Cuckoo workstation aboard the International Space Station. Serena Aumann Chancellor and Alexander Gerst currently working capture operations today. This is the view that they're getting from the International Space Station. The view behind Cygnus is getting a little bit darker. As mentioned, we're entering into an orbital nighttime. The sun's still glistening off the vehicle itself, which is only 250 meters away from the space station at this time. So it's still getting a little bit of light, but soon it'll get just a little bit darker, and some lights from the back there will be still illuminating Cygnus, making sure that we can see it on its way to the International Space Station. Next milestone after 250 meters, it'll cross the Keep Out sphere, which enables Serena Aumann Chancellor and Alexander Gerst to issue an abort if they see anything go wrong with the vehicle. They'll be within range to issue that abort. And then the next point will be the 30-meter hold arrival. That'll be the last milestone to make sure that they are all the systems are go before they actually get just a few meters away from the space station, give or take 10 to 12 meters. Just within the range of the space station's robotic arm that will actually reach out and capture the vehicle. But again, we're holding steady at 250 meters, going through those series of checks as Chaz was describing, repressurizing those tanks, and we'll do a series of go checks before departing for that 30-meter hold point.
Station Houston, Cygnus and ISS are configured for approach inside the Keep Out sphere. Expect approach to resume shortly and stand by for the Cygnus PCS command checkout.
Station copy. Standing by for PCS command checkout.
So what you just heard was Tamara York. Again, that's her. She's here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas, Capcom for the day. She's gathering information from all the flight controllers here in the room and delivering the information to the two astronauts on board, Serena Aumann Chancellor and Alexander Gerst. Sergei Prokopyev taking a bit of a rest after working the docking operations of the Progress 71 vehicle that docked just a few hours ago, just about 14 to 15 hours at this point. And we have confirmation that Cygnus has left the hold. You can see the vehicle itself just passing into an orbital nighttime as well. Sun setting over the vehicle as it departs 250 meters, starts going towards that next milestone of 30 meters after crossing the Keep Out sphere.
Cygnus has resumed approach. Go for Cygnus, PCS command checkout, hold arm per step 3 in 1.102.
We do see vehicle mode approach, and we copy your go for step 3 in 1.102.
Alexander Gerst aboard the station, confirming a good readout from Tamara York, Capcom here in Mission Control Houston.
Houston Station on 2, hold is armed.
Houston copies. Station Houston, hold arm confirmed. Go for Cygnus, PCS command, checkout, disarm, per step 4 and 1.102.
Step 4 and 1.102.
So you hear Capcom Tamara York continue the readouts, going through the checklist that Serena Anand-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst also have, working together for this operations of capture for capturing Northrop Grumman's Cygnus on the CRS-10 mission today. A lot of acronyms being shot around, but Chad, if you can give a good, I guess, explanation of what's being read. What are they actually working on right now?
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like that the crew is configuring their PCS panel that they use to control to send commands to the Cygnus vehicle. Earlier in the mission, at the start, they sent the command to turn on the orientation lights, which you can see in the current image on the screen. That verifies they got a good command path, and that's the same panel that they'll use later on in the mission if they were to have to command Cygnus to hold or even retreat back to the 30-meter or 250-meter hold point, as well as, if need be, abort. So,
with MCC Houston, and the light is outside the corridor.
Some copies.
So still a good view of Cygnus. You were hearing Tamara York again, this Capcom reading commands, reading some of the steps to the two astronauts aboard. We were just talking about the panel that the astronauts have, the orientation lights. Even in the dark, you can sort of see which way Cygnus is facing. It also helps the Cuckoo workstation to get a good view of it. What was just read off is they crossed the Keep Out sphere. They've prepared their panel and are issuing some of the first commands now that they're within range to the Cygnus. Chad, what are some of those first commands that they're actually doing?
Essentially, they're setting up everything, getting ready as the vehicle gets closer. So they're arming the system so that they've got the ability to send those commands as needed. It's not just one button press kind of thing. You've got to arm and then execute kind of, so there's not an accident.
Makes sense. A lot of steps here. Got to make sure that you do it right. As I mentioned before, we'll get some of these loss in communications throughout the approach today. We're communicating with the International Space Station through the TDRS satellites, tracking data and relay satellites. They provide the video and audio communication to the station. We have some minimal gaps here to make sure that the operations run smoothly through our capture time around 4:20 a.m. This will be a very short handover. We'll regain communications here shortly.
For Block Bravo.
Ready to go.
But the views you'll be getting of Cygnus as it approaches the International Space Station should be relatively dark throughout the next milestone. 250-meter hold arrival.
All centered up apart from the light, which is offset from the circle about 4 vehicle width port.
Copy, and we'd like the report.
So you were just hearing Alexander Gerst aboard the International Space Station read out some of what he was seeing. Again, he's got a great view of Cygnus. This is the Cuckoo workstation, but they'll also be looking at the Cygnus approach from the Cupola workstation. This is the bay window from the International Space Station facing down towards the Earth. 7 windows that look down and provide a great view of the outside. Perfect view for an approach of a cargo vehicle, also where the station's robotic arm is positioned. The 2 astronauts, Sarina Anand-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst, will be at the controls of the station's robotic arm, position it in a capture position just about 10 to 12 meters away from station. They'll be the ones to actually work the robotic arm this morning and capture the Cygnus vehicle and the 7,400 pounds of cargo inside. So again, we arrived at the 250-meter hold point in the daytime, departed sometime shortly before crossing it into an orbital nighttime. We should arrive at the 30-meter hold point still within an orbital darkness and get us in a good position for departing shortly after sunrise. One of the requirements when actually flying the Cygnus vehicle, this is timed out perfectly to consider sunrise and sunset. Of course, capturing the vehicle in the dark is possible, but would be less preferred. More sunlight equals more success. So one of the flight rules actually is to make sure that Cygnus is in its capture position during an orbital sun time or an orbital daytime. Lots of data here on the Cuckoo workstation. The ones to really pay attention to are on the right side of the screen. At the right, sort of towards the bottom of that list on the right side of the panel, you can see the data VV to ISS, primary and secondary. That's the distance of Cygnus from the vehicle, from the International Space Station vehicle. The range rate is the rate at which it's approaching, all in meters and meters per second. So again, Cygnus is a vehicle from Northrop Grumman about to approach the International Space Station of NASA. The two are working hand in hand using some of the communications that you see here on their telemetry that are being fed to each other via what's called the C2V2. Now, Chad, what is the C2V2 and how are we getting this data?
The C2V2 is a new comm system that this is our actual second flight using, with the previous being the NG9 mission. And again, we're real pleased with the success and how the actual C2V2 performed over this time. It provides the intercommunication and command pass between the vehicle and the ISS versus having to relay through the TDRA satellite you were talking about before. It gives us basically the direct line of sight type connection with the ISS, which is important whenever you need to send abort commands or anything along those perspective from the crew, being able to react real time. But you know, we've coming into to the rendezvous corridor, we were initially on the relative GPS, and around the 500-meter point, we transitioned over to our external sensors, the LiDAR and TRIDARs. That's basically what we use to take us the rest of the way into the actual capture point. And again, we've got multiple where you've got a primary, secondary, and tertiary type system. So you're always got that level of redundancy built in, and the Cygnus vehicle itself is very robust, and from that perspective, from those sensors all the way down to the flight computer. So definitely a robust vehicle, and to be able to perform the job it needs to operate in the human spaceflight world.
That's how we do it, right? Backups on backups.
Exactly.
Make sure that we have a successful mission for here today. Again, looking for a capture time less than an hour from now, as the Cygnus vehicle is 85 meters away from the International Space Station, approaching at a rate of 0.1 meters per second. Now, each of the Cygnus vehicles are named after influential people in spaceflight. Last one on the NG9 was named after J.R. Thompson, an influential member of the Orbital Sciences team and also a member of NASA. This one is named the SS John Young for the Northrop Grumman CRS-10 mission. John Young, born in San Francisco, California, a veteran of 6 space flights on many different vehicles, actually. Starting with Gemini, he flew on Gemini 3 with Gus Grissom, basically to test the Gemini spacecraft itself, and again on Gemini 10 with Mike Collins to test the rendezvous and close formation piloting, getting some of the techniques for spaceflight ready for the Apollo missions, which he flew 2 missions on. Apollo 10, he was the command module pilot with Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan. This is the flight before the famous Apollo 11 flight that actually landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon with his former pilot or former crewmate Mike Collins on Gemini 10. He also flew on Apollo 16, where he actually walked on the moon. Walked with Charlie Duke, Ken Mattingly as the command module pilot orbiting above. And he also flew the space shuttle on its maiden flight back in STS-1 in 1981 with Bob Crippen. And his final flight was STS-9, where he served as spacecraft commander and was the first Spacelab mission. John Young passed away earlier this year in 2018. This spacecraft named after him and his legacy. In the meantime, Cygnus still approaching the International Space Station, slowing down a little bit on its approach. Now just under 70 meters away from the space station. That next holding point is at 30 meters. So again, Cygnus lifted off from Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia on top of an Antares rocket. On top is 7,400 pounds of cargo. This includes many different things, including hardware and fuel, food, but also 2,300 pounds of experiments. This includes a few facilities and experiments from many different disciplines. One facility is called Refabricator. This is a 3D printing technology. It demonstrates the first integrated 3D printing and recycling technology on board the International Space Station. It actually recycles waste plastic materials into high-quality 3D printer filament, providing potential for sustainable fabrication, repair, and recycling capabilities on long-duration missions. It represents a key component of in-space manufacturing technology development roadmap. Interesting thing about the Refabricator is things can be recycled more than once. Not only do they study different materials and other biological science, physical science, but they also study a decent amount of themselves. One study is called the effect of long-duration hypogravity on the perception of self-motion. It's called Vection. This study aims to determine what, or at least to what extent, an astronaut's ability to visually interpret motion, orientation, and distance may be disrupted in a microgravity environment, and how it may adapt, and also how it may be changed upon returning to Earth. Multiple experimental time points in flight and upon return to Earth allows for the adaptation and recovery process to be investigated. Lots of other experiments on board Cygnus as it approaches the International Space Station, just under 50 meters at this point. Again, we're going towards that 30-meter hold point. That Refabricator is an interesting piece of technology, Chad. It has the ability to not only create 3D printed materials, but recycle them. Has some applications beyond just what can be done on the International Space Station, right?
Yeah, well, one of the big things that plays into the recycler is you have the ability to not have to be dependent upon the Earth to get the filament for the 3D printer itself, but you've got the ability to recycle what you've already got on board. And when we start talking about the next step, with the Deep Space Gateway, or the gateway around the moon, in preparation for going to Mars. We have to really develop these capabilities so that we can have a self-sustaining manufacturing facility on board a a space vehicle that's going out into deep space.
That's true. I mean, we're working with the Cygnus vehicle now, right? It only takes us 2 days to actually, from launch, to arrive at the International Space Station. But once we get further, that's going to take a little bit of time. So if you need another tool, it's not going to be that easy just to get to that Deep Space Gateway.
Exactly. I mean, right now we're doing studies looking at the gateway itself that they're proposing to put around the moon, and it's basically 6.5 days just to get to it, and that's really an infancy step compared to what it's going to be once we venture out beyond that. So, definitely agree. The recycler is a product that or a tool that we really need to take to the next level and have capable in use.
One of the many exciting things that are on board Cygnus right now, just 41 meters away from the International Space Station. You can see the rate slowing down slowly. We're 35 meters away from the space station at this point, going towards that 30-meter holding point. So just a few meters away from that next milestone, the 30-meter hold point. Chad, what's going on at this milestone?
Basically, once we get to the 30-meter hold point, we've got a relative zero velocity. At that point, we'll go ahead and the crew has the options. They want to turn off the orientation lights. Their call on that, as well as our crew, our Mission Control Center in Dulles, will go ahead and perform state of health checks of the vehicle. It's basically our stopping point to verify everything is in the green, everything looks good before we go ahead and give the final go-ahead and final call for clearing from the 30-meter hold and taking it on into basically the capture point.
Very important milestone, as that capture time, we're looking for 4:20 a.m. Central Time, just after sunrise, or at least an orbital sunrise. Still be dark here in Houston.
Correct.
Station Houston, confirm 30-meter hold and set up for capture per step 6 in 1.102.
In copies, we do see VV mode hold, and we are working step 6. Prior range is 30.7.
So you just heard from here in Mission Control Houston, Cygnus has arrived at the 30-meter holding point successfully. As Chad mentioned, the vehicle will undergo a series of checks. The crew actually will have some interaction with it as well. This milestone comes at the end of an orbital nighttime. Very slowly, you'll start seeing Cygnus start to be illuminated, as well as the Earth behind it. Space station now traveling over the USA, 252 statute miles over the Earth right now. On a southeasterly coast, it'll cross over the Caribbean and into an orbital sunrise just over Brazil. During this 30-meter hold, of course, series of checks undergoing, but also a go, no-go for departure. All of the flight controllers just making sure that at their end, or from their perspective, that Cygnus is okay to continue to approach the International Space Station. Again, this is a very important milestone, as the very next one will be the arrival at the capture point, just a few meters away from the International Space Station, ready to reach out with the station's robotic arm and capture the 2,400 pounds of cargo inside. Normal part of the procedure is the station's cameras, and you can see the telemetry overlaid from one of those cameras actually facing Cygnus as it's 30 meters away. You can see the outline of the robotic arm. It looks a little bit pink from this view, but at the bottom of the screen, you can see the outline of the station's robotic arm in its capture position. From this angle, you can see Cygnus oriented where it's pointing to the left, or at least the top of it would be. The point that the station's robotic arm captures Cygnus is at the back of the vehicle, as Chad was describing earlier, at the point of the service module, or the service end of the Cygnus. as we're waiting for the OK to depart the 30 meters. Again, you'll hear that from Tamara York, the Capcom here in Mission Control Houston today. Lots of other things on board Cygnus, not only experiments, but some hardware as well, including some new laptops. The station runs on about 100 laptops, give or take, and these new laptops will replace previous generation computers used aboard the station. Also some water storage system tanks, some urine processor assemblies, as well as a few other spare parts. Chad, I think they also have some ice cream going aboard.
Yeah, in one of the pullers we have in our active cargo, I believe there's some ice cream as well as some tea heading up to give them a little bit more eager opportunity to get the hatch open today.
All the more reason for an on-time capture at 4:20 a.m. Central Time. Northrop Grumman's Cygnus and the International Space Station just about 252 statute miles above the Earth now, flying over Cuba. You can see the Terminator line, the sunrise, orbital sunrise, over in the distance there. Again, it'll be a few more minutes until we start seeing the Cygnus illuminated and the Earth underneath. First signs of the illuminated Earth that you'll see will be just over the Amazon, over Brazil. And here we go, the Cygnus and International Space Station starting to be illuminated. Still in a 30-meter hold position, but very shortly we'll get the confirmation from Capcom Tamara York reading out to the space station once it departs. Again, this is the last milestone before it arrives at the capture point, about 10 to 12 meters away from the International Space Station, where the Canadarm2, the station's robotic arm that you can sort of see at the bottom right portion of your screen, is already positioned, ready to capture Cygnus on time today. Daytona and Earth starting to come into view. The International Space Station 253 statute miles above the Amazon over Brazil. Great view of Cygnus holding at 30 meters. Still in a hold position, just a few more boxes to check before we depart. Again, this is the last milestone before the capture point arrival, just about 10 or 12 meters away from the space station. Serena Aumann Chancellor and Alexander Gerst on board the International Space Station going through some of these final checks before departure. They will be at the controls of the station's robotic arm today for capture at 4:20 a.m. Central Time. We're in what's called joint operations right now, as we hold at 30 meters. Here in Mission Control Houston, teams working from the space station side of things, and in Northrop Grumman's Flight Control Center over in Dulles, Virginia. Mission Director Zach Dwyer leading the teams over there. These teams working together, of course, through the visiting vehicle officer Tom Castleberry here in Mission Control Houston. As we head towards the final steps of capturing the Cygnus vehicle on the CRS-10 mission this morning.
Step 3 is complete. Crew is ready for Cygnus approach to capture point.
We copy, Alex.
And the block Bravos are all centered up now, both cameras.
Cygnus is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
Agent copies.
So the teams here in Mission Control Houston, teams in Dulles, Virginia, and the crew aboard the International Space Station all ready to depart the 30-meter holding point. Still holding, but shortly the vehicle will be configured for that final departure and arrival, departing 30 meters and arriving at the capture point. Should be occurring here shortly.
Cygnus has resumed approach to the capture point. Monitor approach within 30 meters per step 7 in 1.102. The crew is primed to issue retreat if primary range is less than 6 meters.
Agent copies. We're in step 7 of 1.102. VV mode is approach prior range, currently 28.8 and decreasing.
We copy.
That was Capcom Tamara York here in Mission Control Houston. Good readout of the Cygnus departure and confirmation from Alexander Gerst saying that it is, well, currently now just under 28 meters and closing at a rate of just under 0.05 meters per second. Pretty slow, but that's part of the design to make sure that Cygnus is going to arrive at the capture point safe and sound. So this is the home stretch for Cygnus arriving at the capture point. Once it does, and it is captured, there's a couple more steps to make sure Cygnus is ready to be berthed to the International Space Station. Chad, what's the story there? What's happening to Cygnus once it's captured?
Essentially, once we're grappled with the Ken 2 arm, we'll start going through configuring the vehicle, shutting down the GNC systems that are no longer needed because they're a big draw on the power. As you can tell right now, as we're coming up, we're primarily on battery power. What little bit of light we do get on the solar arrays as well. And once the arm has a hold of us, and once we started shutting down and safing the systems, then the next thing is to configure the power source from our own internal power to the power that can be provided to us via the robotic arm through that grapple fixture we were talking about earlier. The PV, the GF, the P stands for power, so it allows the power to come from the ISS via the arm to our vehicle and provide what we need as it's holding on and eventually maneuvering us around to berth us to Node 1 Nadir.
There you go. So guidance, navigation, and control, that's the GNC that you were talking about. No need for that because it's already arrived. You don't need to guide it anywhere. But the power is a big concern, right? That's why they have the solar arrays for the journey to the International Space Station. But then if you don't need to collect any power, you can get it from the space station, which itself is providing a decent amount of power with those big solar arrays.
Correct, and also since the fact that we have powered payloads on board, you definitely want to keep the power because that's also controlling the thermal environment inside the large can. We call the pressurized cargo module, the PCM. So you want to maintain a good environment for it all the way up until the crew attaches it to the station and they open the door.
Of course, that's a huge reason why the Cygnus is arriving at the space station now. There's 7,400 pounds of cargo inside. Lots of important experiments, different hardware, as well as some ice cream. You got to keep that cold.
Exactly.
Cygnus making a good approach. You can see it coming into the view that's positioned in front of the Canadarm2. That robotic arm will be the one capturing the vehicle today. At the controls is Serena Auñón, Chancellor of NASA, and Commander Alexander Gerst of the European Space Agency. What you're seeing behind Cygnus now is the Earth, the South Atlantic Ocean International Space Station, flying 259 statute miles over the South Atlantic Ocean just east off the coast of Uruguay. Cygnus slowly coming into view. Again, the rate is pretty slow from the 30-meter point to the capture point, obviously designed that way to make sure it has a safe arrival. The rate about 0.03 meters per second at this point. Cygnus is 17 meters and closing, looking for about 10 to 12 meters where the Canadarm is positioned now. In the back, you can see the service components that provide guidance, navigation, control, some power. As Chad was describing earlier, that little white box hanging out to the what looks like bottom from this view. Chad, what is that?
That's the NanoRack deployer that we have mounted on the exterior of the service module. And typically it's a 6-shooter. It's got 6 different bays within it that we can load up with NanoRack or small satellites that we deploy out after we leave the station. And on this particular mission, it's got 3 different satellites loaded up in the bays to be jettisoned at the end of the mission.
End of the mission being, we're arriving at the space station now, but the end of the mission being after it departs the space station, right?
That's correct. Yes. Once, typically, it's probably been for the past several missions now. Usually, as we depart the ISS, we'll go ahead and climb up to our higher altitude, preferred by our nanosat customers, and then do the jettison of the nanosats themselves. And then perform other activities, and then usually it's within 1 or 2 weeks after departure of ISS, then we'll go ahead and do our destructive reentry, taking out the trash that was loaded on during the 2 weeks prior.
What a great journey for Cygnus, but we're just at the beginning now. You can see Cygnus coming into the view of the camera at the end of the space station's robotic arm. This is a view from the Canadarm itself. You can see the end of the latching end effector there. The white box at the left, that's what Chad was talking about, the NanoRack's deployer. Cygnus coming into view, you can see the service components, even the solar arrays, those ultraflex solar arrays. And that little circle with the 3 prongs that will actually be where the Canadarm2 will be moving in today, and the crosshairs, that white bar with the black behind it, that'll be the point that the Serena Aunen-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst will be aiming towards to make sure we get a capture on time today, scheduled for 4:20 a.m. Central Time. But of course, there's a series of checks to go underneath everything going smoothly, still so far for capture of the Cygnus vehicle today. Rate slowing down to pretty much 0 at this point, just a few more boxes to check before we have official confirmation of the capture point arrival.
We see CP hold.
And now to confirm, that was you confirmed capture point hold per step 8 in 1.102?
Negative, that was just me reporting the VV mode. We will work on the confirmation in step 8 and report back to you.
Copy.
So that was a confirmation. Cygnus holding pretty much rock steady at the capture point, just a little bit over 12 meters away.
Could you have a look at the iris on camera 3? I think it's cycling. It might be confused. If you had experience with that, let us know what we need to do to fix that.
Copy. We'll take a look.
Now that Cygnus is holding right at the capture point, now the teams are just going a final go, no go.
The iris cycling from the ground.
Copies.
This final go, no go will be the final steps to make sure that all systems are go and the crew can actually take the controls of the Canadarm2, put it into a mode where it will start moving in closer to where Cygnus is positioned. It's Cygnus's job now to just hold steady as the Serena Aunen-Chancellor and Alexander Gerst take the controls of the Canadarm2 and move it in to capture the vehicle today.
We see good iris now on monitor 1, camera 3, and capture conditions are confirmed and crew is ready for Cygnus capture for step 8.
Stand by for capture.
Standing by.
Station Houston, go for Cygnus capture sequence, step 4 in 1.110. Cygnus capture, begin monitoring the backaway cue card.
Station copies 1.110. We are in step 4 and we are on the backaway cue card.
Teams here in Mission Control Houston and of course in Dulles and all around the world doing the checks. We are go for capture. Good readout to the crew aboard the International Space Station, Serena and Anand Chancellor and Alexander Gerst. All of the milestones complete. Last step is the capture itself. The crew on board will be configuring the station's robotic arm at this time to start moving in to capture. Time is 4:20 a.m. Central Time now, just a few more minutes. And we'll start seeing the arm moving in and get an on-time capture today. Once the Canadarm2 starts moving, there'll be a series of milestones before capture, some readouts of the distance from the arm to the capture position over the pin, and then we'll get a couple stages of capture. There's first stage capture and then second stage. Cygnus will be officially captured after that second stage, and all the snares are closed and ready and locked. Okay, and confirmation the arm is in motion. We're in the home stretch here for capturing the Cygnus vehicle today. Okay, Cygnus is now in free drift, configured for capture. Canadarm2 is 2 meters away. One meter away from capture. Again, there's going to be 2 stages. Now over the pin. Trigger. Snares are closed. Don't worry, this was expected. We have a 5-second handover of communications. We'll regain that video feed shortly. And regaining some of those communications, everything's still looking good. Waiting for confirmation of that final stage of capture. Okay, we have confirmed capture at 4:28 a.m. Central Time today. Now 4:29 should hear the confirmed call from here in Mission Control Houston. International Space Station and the Cygnus vehicle, 262 statute miles over the South Indian Ocean.
And what a beautiful capture. Congratulations. As we gather this week to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station and the spirit of exploration it represents, we celebrate today the mission of the SS John Young, reaffirming that the spirit of exploration is alive and well today and will be instilled in the generations to come. Congratulations to the NG-10 team.
Houston, station on 2. The International Space Station would also like to welcome the SS John Young on board. Many, many thanks to the multiple people and engineers on the ground who helped execute this flawless portion of the mission. Cygnus has not only brought us very important cargo for station operations, but also critical science on multiple fronts, including tissue on a chip and protein crystal growth, which could help find a cure for Parkinson's disease. To John Young's family, and especially Susie, the Expedition 57 crew is proud to have the SS John Young with us on orbit. John flew on multiple vehicles from Gemini to Apollo and the Space Shuttle, and now he is finally flying a long-duration mission on the International Space Station. It is our honor, and we want to thank you for sharing a part of him with us today.
And Serena, those were just beautiful words. Thank you.
Thank you, Houston, and thanks to all our trainers, especially Linda and Mike, for fantastic training to get us to this point.
Some beautiful words from both Capcom Tamara York here in Mission Control Houston, as well as Serena Auñón Chancellor, who, with Alexander Gerst from the European Space Agency, captured the Cygnus vehicle today at 4:28 a.m. Central Time. Again, captured time today was 4:28 a.m. Central Time. The International Space Station and the Cygnus vehicle, 262 statute miles over the Indian Ocean. So once again, after lifting off from the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia on top of an Antares rocket just 2 days ago at 3:01 a.m. Central Time, the Cygnus vehicle made a 2-day journey to be captured at the International Space Station by Serena Auñón Chancellor and Alexander Gerst at the controls of the station's robotic arm at 4:28 a.m. Central Time today. 7,400 pounds of cargo inside, lots of scientific investigations, including some of the ones that Serena Auñón Chancellor herself are most excited about, tissue chips and many biological experiments, as well as great facilities like 3D printing facilities and some other investigations. This vehicle, of course, called the SS John Young, as was reflected in some of those kind words from both Serena Auñón Chancellor and Tamara York. John Young, a veteran of multiple flights, as Auñón Chancellor described, including Gemini, Apollo, and the Space Shuttle. Young actually walked on the moon during Apollo 16 and took the Space Shuttle on its maiden voyage with Bob Crippen for STS-1 back in 1981. Now ready for a long-duration stay aboard the International Space Station. Today is November 19th. Tomorrow, November 20th, will be the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station. The first element of the space station, the FGB, translated from Russian to the Functional Cargo Block, also called Zarya or Sunrise, made its voyage to space, parking 250 meters or 250 miles above the Earth after launching aboard a Proton rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. That was 20 years ago. Now we have a orbiting complex the size of a 6-bedroom house with hundreds of experiments being conducted every 6 months. fully operational with multiple people from around the world aboard. Over 200 astronauts have actually visited the space station, and thousands of investigations conducted in that time. A successful mission for the Northrop Grumman Cygnus vehicle on the 10th resupply mission. I'd like to thank Chad Davis from Northrop Grumman for joining us today and describing the vehicle and all the intricate systems and choreography that had to take place over this past couple days and will continue to take place over these next few months. Chad, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us during capture operations today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, that'll wrap up our coverage for today. Again, 4:28 Central Time capture after a 3:01 liftoff. We'll be back very shortly to cover the final stages of the Cygnus's journey to the space station, actually birthing the vehicle to the nadir port of the Unity module. This is the Earth-facing side of the module that joined Zarya in space just a few weeks after its journey, installed to Zarya during STS-88. Cygnus will make its way to that module just before the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station. That'll wrap up our coverage here. This is Mission Control Houston.